Hello and welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Ann Hess. Our topic today is equine leaky gut syndrome, fact, fiction, or feed fad. Joining us to talk about that and more is Dr. Wendy Pearson from the University of Guelph. Welcome, Dr. Pearson, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Before we jump into today's discussion, I'd like to remind the audience, if you're tuning in, you can post your questions there at any time in the chat, or if you're tuning in via social media, you can post those there in the comments. So, Wendy, let's start by having you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your role there at University of Guelph.
Sure. I've been an associate professor at the University of Guelph. Been here since 2016 full time. I have a joint teaching and research appointment. I teach undergraduate courses in equine physiology, and I'm currently also teaching a graduate course in advanced animal nutrition. And my research program primarily is focused around, I guess you could say, a focal point of inflammation, but inflammation both from the positive perspective as well as potentially the pathological perspective in horses.
Very good. Well, let's dive into our discussion today on leaky gut syndrome. What exactly is it, and how does it manifest in animals like horses?
You would think there would be a simple answer to that question, wouldn't you? But the reality is, most of what we think we know about leaky gut in horses is either extrapolated from other species or it's an academic argument based on a sort of a event that happens. So basically what we're talking about is when the gut barrier, which is, so really its job is to maintain the integrity of the inside of the animal. So to protect the inside of the animal from potential toxins and such that are from the outside of the animal. So of course, when a horse eats food, technically the inside of the GI tract you could make an argument, it's still outside of the horse. So the barrier of the GI tract is really important in making sure that the only stuff from the feed that actually gets into the bloodstream are nutrients and things like that are theoretically beneficial for the animal. When we see a situation of leaky gut, basically what's happening is that barrier function starts to break down. And the consequence of that is leakage of compounds in the GI tract that are supposed to stay there actually have the opportunity now to leak into the systemic circulation of the horse. And so what that does is it triggers, I would say, a low-grade inflammatory response that has been linked with a number of problems, not so much in horses. We have very little equine research to go from, but certainly in terms of humans, we see problems with muscle function, problems with chronic inflammatory diseases, allergies, and things like that. So what it means to the horse at this stage in terms of what we know, we don't really know very much about that. We do know that a single exercise bout that follows transport stress will trigger that hyperpermeability of the GI tract. That's about the extent of what we know so far in terms of leaky gut for horses.
So with that knowledge gap, why is this syndrome such a concern for, animal health and performance?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because I think it's fair to say that leaky gut has the potential to really be a meaningful contributor to a lot of the chronic inflammatory problems that we see, particularly those that are GI related, gastrointestinal related. And we certainly know that gastrointestinal diseases are a major problem for equine health. And if we can make a connection between leaky gut syndrome in horses and some of these chronic inflammatory conditions that plague, particularly, for instance, plaguing athletic horses, I think that that's going to be a really important step forward in our knowledge. And I think the knowledge gap it's really important to recognize it for what it is. It doesn't mean that leaky gut doesn't have an effect on horses. It may have a very profound effect. And I think that we need to be informed initially by research in other species, which really indicate to us that we should be paying close attention to this and learning more about it.
So, when it comes to poor gut health, what are the warning signs or symptoms that we should be watching for?
Well, because equine leaky gut syndrome isn't actually defined in the literature, if I can say that, there aren't really any clinical signs that technically are associated with it, because technically it's not an actual disorder. But what we think is associated with some clues that we have that a horse may be experiencing problems with this. Fecal water syndrome seems to be connected with equine leaky gut in some cases. So that may be, if you have excessive fecal water, that may be an indication that you've got some problems with leaky gut. Some of the other types of clinical signs that are sometimes associated with leaky gut are things like reduced performance. Sometimes you will have these chronic low-grade inflammatory conditions that can be attributed to leaky gut as well. But it's an unsatisfactory answer, and I recognize that. But unfortunately, we don't have enough information right now to say definitively, here are a list of clinical signs that if your horse has this, then this is the diagnosis. We're not there yet.
How about stressors or environmental factors? Are there concerns there that could be contributing to increased gut permeability in animals?
Yeah, for sure there are, and this we do know a few things about. We did some research with a graduate student of mine a few years ago, and we were able to demonstrate that, and I think I mentioned this already, where if you have 1 hour of trailer transport followed by moderate intensity exercise, that does trigger an increase in gut permeability in horses. So for sure, we know that sort of thing will have an impact. Another thing that that we had some evidence for, there was a master's thesis, I want to say, came out of Michigan State a few years ago. And that student reported that either provision of phenylbutazone or the ulcers that were associated with provision of phenylbutazone was able to increase gut permeability in horses as well. So there seems to be a link between non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug administration as well.
What are some promising approaches, nutritional, environmental, or otherwise, for preventing or managing leaky gut syndrome?
Again, we don't have a lot of information on this, but what we do know is we know that high starch diets in other species, we don't have this evidence in horses, but certainly in other species, high starch diets is associated with an increase in gut permeability. So to reduce the amount of soluble carbohydrate that's in the horse's diet is thought to be a good strategy in a horse at risk for developing leaky gut syndrome. We also did some research on, it's actually a product based on a fermentation of Aspergillus oryza. It's a type of, kind of like a mushroom in a sense. And that product actually completely blocked stress-induced gastrointestinal hyperpermeability in horses. So there are some, well, at least one product out there that has pretty sound scientific evidence that it will significantly reduce the risk of leaky gut syndrome in horses.
At least one tool in the toolbox there. Looking ahead, what excites you most about the future of your research in this space?
Well, we've got some proposals kind of out in right now that we're starting to work on. One of the projects I've got a PhD student and a master's student working on right now is really to try to understand what the role of fitness is in exercise-induced leaky gut. With the theory, again, if we're looking at human athletes, the evidence would suggest that as the athlete becomes more fit, their leaky gut responses to exercise is actually worse. So what implication does that have with our athletic horses? And I don't know what the answer is. We don't have that answer yet, but I think now that we're starting to understand that leaky gut is probably a thing in horses, we now have to really understand what is the role of fitness. In fact, it's possible that fitness may actually protect horses against stress-induced leaky gut, but we don't know. So that's number one, is really understanding the role of fitness. Number two is understanding the implication of this post-exercise leaky gut, assuming that the data we have now give us enough evidence that it's actually happening. But what we don't know is, so what? Maybe we see this hyperpermeability, and I mean, it's possible that it's contributing to the post-exercise inflammatory response we see, which is actually beneficial for training, right? It's helping tissues adapt to exercise stress, which gives us the training effect. Is it possible that the inflammation resulting from post-exercise gastrointestinal hyperpermeability is actually contributing to that, and therefore is essential for the training effect, in which case we shouldn't be messing with it at all? So that it's an interesting kind of a different perspective there, but because at this point we just don't know, so we need a lot more research to start teasing out these answers.
Dr. Wendy Pearson, University of Guelph, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight on this issue.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Wendy will be a speaker at the 2025 Kemin Intestinal Health Symposium, which is October 16th through the 17th. This is the 7th annual symposium for Kemin and will include presentations from respected industry experts across the poultry, swine, dairy, beef, and equine industries on topics related to the key pillars of intestinal health. For more information to register for this online symposium, please use the link there on your screen. For Feedstuffs, I'm Ann Hess.